Have you ever wondered what would happen to your assets if you were hypothetically sued or got into a lawsuit? Well, on this week's episode, I'm excited to bring on Brian Bradley as a guest. Bradley is a senior managing partner at Bradley Legal Corp and is a leading educator for nationally recognized asset protection attorney for high-risk professionals, entrepreneurs, real estate investors, and ultra high net worth families. Collectively, they're protecting over $5 billion worth in assets. Brian's goal is to give you peace of mind knowing that your assets are safe and they make it difficult for predatory lawyers to target vulnerable people. Brian was selected to the Best Attorneys of America List 2020, Lawyers of Distinction List 3 years in a row 2018 through 2020, Super Lawyers Rising Star List 2021 and 2015, nominated to America's Top 100 High Stake Litigators List, and the top 100 in real estate. Brian also writes and teaches on advanced estate and strategic planning and is a featured speaker at numerous investment summits, real estate, cash flow, finance, and life coaching shows. Introducing asset protection attorney at Bradley Legal Corp, Brian Bradley. Welcome to the VJ Kailash Show. On this week's episode, I'm excited to have Brian Bradley join us. He's an asset protection attorney. Brian, I'm very excited to have you on the show, and I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, thanks, VJ, for having me on. It's going to be an important topic. I'm going to try to keep it, fun and not legally dense. And I'm not anyone's attorney or legal guru, so we're just going to be talking in generalities. And I think that, you and your listeners are going to learn a lot.
Perfect. Yeah, it's going to be for entertainment purposes only and maybe a little bit educational as well. So really do appreciate having you on. But before we jump into the technical stuff, which I'm really looking forward to, could you tell us a little bit about yourself? You have an extremely impressive background, and I'd love to hear more about your story and how you even ended up in the asset protection space.
Yeah, I got into law school just being an injured athlete in college and trying to figure out where to channel all of my competitiveness. And my mom was like, hey, you should go and, think about law school. It's like, no, I don't really want to go to law school. I want to go become a Navy SEAL and jump out of airplanes and blow things up. And she's like, no, you're really good with, logic, arguing and all of that. So like, all right, I'll give it a year. If I don't like it, then we're going to go blow things up. And I just fell in love with law. It was easy for me. I was, top of my class. I was working at the DA's office while going to law school, and I thought I was going to be the next, big time prosecutor. And then the economy 08, 09, 010 tanked, and I was the youngest one coming into the prosecutor's office. So I was, they got put on a hiring freeze. So I was one of the first ones let go. And so I had to transition from, trial work, criminal law to civil law. And, that just turned into, the economy dripped into all the private firms, and they were having a hard time paying bills and clients not paying. And I was working at a chop shop, literally just, I think I had 300 open cases at one time.
Wow.
Yeah, it was just insane. And it was a family firm, and I was the only attorney settling cases. And because it was a family firm, they're like, hey, the holidays are coming up and we got to have a good holiday. Like, that's my son, that's my wife, that's my son's, girlfriend, that's this person, that's Uncle Joe. I got to let you go. And I was like, what, are you kidding me? I'm paying your bills. And he's like, yeah, family's more important. And so, he pulled me aside and he's like, listen, man, you got the it factor, the magic, and just, go out on your own. Don't be afraid to stick your neck out there, start your own practice. Went and moved to Michigan, was doing some high profile cases out in Michigan, and, just sort of built my name up as one of the top trial lawyers in the nation. And I just realized, man, I'm tired of people coming to me after the fact, after you're hurt, after you're injured, after this stuff. And I'm like, I like investing. I like money. How do we get you to protect this stuff, beforehand? And I started researching the topic because you're not taught asset protection in law school. You're not taught it at the firms that you're with. You just have to kind of luck your way into people who work in this field and know what the heck they're talking about. And we'll explain all the jumbled mess and why there's a jumbled mess to begin with. And so I reached out and did some research on who were the top 3 asset protection attorneys in the nation. And I just reached out to them. I'm like, hey, this is who I am. This is what I can do, with my trial experience, but I want to get into asset protection and I want to get into a high level asset protection. So let's just make a deal. Clients I bring in, all you got to do is, cut me 20%. And if I don't bring anybody in, there's no loss on you, but I want to learn everything that you're doing. And they're like, hey, the cojones on this kid, but but sure, like I like how you just called us out on it, and good luck. And I just went through all three of them, realized what works, what doesn't work, what I like the best, which is this really strong hybrid trust, which will break down why I like it a lot and why I utilize it primarily. And from there, I just started out marketing them, marketing them, and realized like I really like this field of asset protection because, like I said, like I like money, I like investing, I like the law, I like the tax law, so we want to keep what we have, and so it was like that perfect marriage of everything that I really like in one field.
Wow, that is an incredible story. So let's start kind of broad and kind of work our way to the center. So for the broad topic, what is asset protection? And from there, we'll go deeper into this
Yeah, no,
conversation.
absolutely. And asset protection is not, estate planning. It's modern estate planning. And what we're doing is placing a legal barrier between your assets and, the potential creditor, the person suing you, trying to take your money before it's needed. And that's the key word. It all has to be established beforehand. So it's just like a barrier, like a safe for your gold or your guns or your valuables. Anything of value you want to put behind the legal barrier and out of your personal name so that it's not easily attached with a lien or reached. Just like the rich. And I really like this Tony Robbins saying, success leaves clues, right? The rich, they don't own things in their personal names. Their businesses and trusts do. They just get the beneficial use and enjoyment out of them while separating out the liability side of it. And so, and it's not, and I get this call a lot, and I'm going to hit on this. I don't know if we'll be able to hit on it fully in detail, depends on how much time we have and if you go there, but it's not hiding money or moving assets to not pay or avoid paying taxes. That's illegal. And you're going to just remember you're taxed on your worldwide income, if you're a U.S. resident. And again, we can break that stuff down, but you hear a lot of people saying like, oh, hey, just go stick your money offshore and never pay taxes on it. Fraud, like the IRS, go on the IRS, has a whole website for it. And don't call me saying, hey, Brian, I want asset protection and not pay taxes. That is not asset protection. Like you have tax mitigation strategies. This is not hiding assets and not pay taxes. It is protecting, your assets with legal barriers to help you in lawsuits. It's basically like how collectible you are for lawsuits.
Perfect. So it's not necessarily meant for taxes in this situation. It's purely meant for lawsuits and
Correct.
okay.
It's tax neutral. Yeah. Protect your assets first, then have your CPA and wealth managers mitigate your taxes. And it's really, comes down to just like we live in really crazy times now. So it's really important to make sure you lock your assets down.
Absolutely. So who do you think would benefit from asset protection? Just people who own businesses or just a everyday employee who doesn't really own many assets?
It really just comes down to what's your exposed net worth, and what are you investing in? So if you own nothing, then you don't have anything to protect, right? But if you're a high-risk professional, let's say you're a doctor, a lawyer, CPA, well, you're already a mark, whether you own something or not. You're just perceived to be rich. You can be just coming out of residency, wearing your white coat for the first day, poor as heck because you're dead up the wazoo, and hit somebody in your new BMW that you bought, because that's the first thing residents do when they get out of residency is like, oh, hey, I'm making some money now. Let me go buy 2 BMWs, right?
Yeah.
And wearing your white coat while you're driving it and you hit somebody with your car. What's the person going to think? Like, let me go sue this doctor. I'm going to go get rich now. I struck it rich, but they don't know you don't own anything except for 2 new BMWs that you shouldn't have bought. Or, it's just you have rental properties, right? You're investing in real estate. You can be a cop. You can be a nurse. You can be a firefighter taking charge, or, teachers taking charge of your own retirement, and investing in rental properties, or one of those doctors and, successful entrepreneurs and business owners who are investing in real estate. So it's just a matter of, if you have something and it's going to get lost and you're a high risk professional or a business owner, entrepreneur, you have risk. And what we want to do is just protect the equity that you have in all of your assets, even your stock accounts, cryptocurrencies and all that, and your cash, and protect it around legal bubbles.
Got it. So I want to take this conversation two different ways. It's talking about the real estate side and then also about investing in the stock market from an asset protection side. Which way would you like to start the conversation?
Well, whichever one, likes your fancy, I don't, it doesn't really matter.
Okay. Well, let's talk about the stock market, for example. So let's say you're a doctor, you invest in a 401k. What can they do to protect their assets?
You don't need to do anything with the 401k. That's the great thing because they're ERISA exempt protected. So it already has protection exemption around it. Same thing like IRAs, instead of being federally exempt, through ERISA, every state has good state exemptions for, IRAs. So what you need to realize is, depending on the type of asset you're investing in, is there an exempt status or is there not? If an asset is exempt, then it's already protected. And a good way to think about this is, I think most of your listeners will know who O.J. Simpson is, like the famous football player who got, charged for murdering his wife and her alleged boyfriend. And then he got off of the murder charge, and then he was sued civilly for wrongful death. Even though he was found not guilty on the murder charges, the civil lawsuit is a completely different type of burdens that you have to go through. So they sued him for all of his assets, all that he had. Well, what he had was his NFL pension, which was 100% exempt through ERISA, and his Florida mansion. And in Florida, you have a homestead exemption. So even though they had a multi-million-dollar judgment against him, they never were able to collect on him because all his assets were in exempt classes. So that's the power of exemption. So if you're investing through your 401k, 403b, if you're, a doctor in a hospital, those are exempt asset classes. Your personal brokerage account, that's just your day trade account or whatever, which is not a retirement account, is not an exempt asset. So we actually have to protect those. And the way we protect those, and similar with cryptocurrencies, you have to disclose them. So don't think like, oh, I bought crypto, no one will ever know. Like, that's just completely false. Very easy to discover. You have to disclose the assets you have, during the discovery phase. So the way you protect your personal brokerage accounts, along with like cryptocurrencies, is we assign the accounts into a management company, like a limited partnership. Almost every brokerage account will have a one-page assignment. It's just all you're doing is removing your name as the account owner and putting in now your name as your management company, and then you're the manager of your management company. So you're just going to keep investing how you're investing.
That's really interesting. Okay, could we talk a little bit more about that? So are there two separate entities? So there's a management company and then there's a LP where you can actually invest.
No, you would use the limited partnership as the management company.
Got it. Okay. And it's a simple page you fill out?
Yeah, so you would just tell your broker, hey, I want to assign my brokerage account out of my name and into my management. And generally they would literally, like, I've never seen a brokerage firm that doesn't have one, but if they don't, your firm, your asset protection attorney should have one, and they just, we would use that. But I've never had to use ours because every brokerage firm we've ever had to transfer to, they already have them.
Got it. So you're saying that if it's done properly, if someone were to sue you, they can't touch those assets since you don't own them.
Correct. You're taking those stock accounts out of your personal name and into the name of the management company. And then if you were to like mow somebody down with your car or get sued personally, now it's not just sitting there in your personal name. So now there's a legal barrier and buffer that they have to pierce through to try to get access to your stock account.
Wow, that's incredible. Okay. I want to shift the conversation now to the real estate side, because I know a lot of our audience also invests in real estate. What are some asset protection tools? Or I know LLCs are a major one, so let's talk about that.
Yeah, so there's a lot of different layers, right? And I think as we break down these layers, I think the best way to start with this concept is first to think about winter, okay? When it comes to asset protection, we have different layers. Just like when we're going on to skiing in the wintertime or it's cold, we dress in layers, right? So the first entry layer is going to be your base layer, and it's going to sit on your skin. And this is an LLC, so a limited liability company and insurance. This is when you're just starting out investing and you have like 0 to 3 units or properties, and your exposed net worth is generally below $250,000. Then as you grow and you add more assets and you hit that, 4 unit mark, and you're, investing maybe in multiple states, you have a high risk profession, you're hitting around that $500,000, $700,000 net mark. This is when you want that mid layer, which is usually a little bit thicker. It's going to be made out of like merino wool for us guys wearing a sweatshirt, or a cardigan for you ladies. This is a management company. We use limited partnerships for this mid layer. And essentially you're having all your LLCs at the base layer flow into the management company. That way you just are maintaining one K1, one tax filing at the end of the year. Cleans up your system for tax purposes and accounting, lets you protect more assets, and it gives us like that second layer of defense, okay? Then when you hit around that 1 million net worth mark, and you want this outer shell waterproof layer, like that's your outside jacket, your ski jacket. It keeps you nice and dry and warm when the weather is really bad. It's your doomsday lawsuit protection, your asset protection hybrid trust. But by layering like this, what you're doing now is making yourself more flexible. You can adjust to make yourself more comfortable. You can take the outer shell layer off. You can take the undershirt off. You can take the mid layer off. The same thing goes with your asset protection plan. You want to have different layers so you're never really stuck in a corner. And so, to go into, your question specifically about LLCs, again, that's layer one, right? Asset protection 101, the entry level layer, the base layer that most of you and your listeners are aware of, which is the LLC, the holding company that holds your real estate, that holds risky assets. Anything that has a key or that needs insurance or that can go boom, they all go in LLCs. How many is just going to depend on your profile and the states that you're investing in. We all know about LLCs generally, a little bit now. So I want to spend, I think, more time breaking down these 3 misconceptions about LLCs that relate to the lack of effectiveness of how they are. So that way, as you grow and your wealth grows, you actually then understand the purpose of the other layers of protection. Does that sound good?
That sounds perfect. Let's go.
Yeah. So the first problem generally is that most clients have single member LLCs all in their personal name. Now, the problem here is that courts now have a tendency to disregard single member LLCs. So when your corporate veil is pierced, it's not very effective. Now you're going to be held personally liable. And CPAs tend to set up LLCs as disregarded entities for tax purposes. That's great for taxes, but it's really bad for lawsuits. What being disregarded means is that the IRS is not taxing your business separate from you. It passes through to you personally. And because of this, they're basically worthless for asset protection and lawsuit issues because that liability also passes directly through to you. But don't get me wrong, right? Like I still use LLCs, but I use them as the base layer entry protection level. Then we just start adding the layers of protection as you grow and scale and get more visible. And what you really want is eventually for those single member LLCs that are holding your real estate to eventually be owned not by you, the individual, but by a second layer of protection, which should be a multi-membered limited partnership, not another LLC. And again, what we're doing now is properly layering the protection system, okay? The next big issue comes around a lot of confusion of just like, where do we even set these LLCs up in? Like, do you go to Delaware, Wyoming, Texas, Nevada? And well, it really just comes down to an issue of just what are you holding and where are you holding it at? And attorneys and CPAs really convolute this. And so let's say, for example, it's California real estate that you own and you're a California resident. And then you go and set up a Wyoming LLC because you hear it talked about on shows all the time, promoters talking about it. And now you're holding a key piece of California real estate in this Wyoming LLC. And you're paying California franchise tax on this out-of-state Wyoming LLC. What you've done is just convert your Wyoming LLC to a California LLC because you're doing business in the state of California. You're paying the California franchise tax. But if you ever have a liability issue in California, meaning like you're getting sued because you're a resident there, and that's where you're at, and that's where the property's at, a judge in California is going to apply the California law, not Wyoming law. And this is because a judge in California or any other state, it can be Tennessee property or Florida property or Texas property, they don't care that your LLC is a Wyoming registered LLC. What they care is that it's doing business in the state in California or, whatever other state that the asset is. It's done this really big legal fancy word called availed itself of the protection and laws of that state. So that, again, that's the state the asset is in. That's the state the injury occurred in or the damage occurred in. It's going to be that state laws that are going to apply. You don't just get to go and buy and take Wyoming or Delaware tort and damage laws or personal injury laws with you to other states. You can't go buy another state's more beneficial laws. That's not how our legal system works here. So for asset protection in real estate, the general rule of thumb is you create the LLC in the state that the asset is at. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So create the LLC where the property's at. Yeah.
Yeah. And then you hear the third big misconception is just this fancy term called anonymity. And what people are thinking is like you can create these anonymous Wyoming LLCs and you can just like disappear and ghost a lawsuit. And this is just completely false. But I get this question literally every day. When your LLC is sued, you're going to be legally required to appear and defend it. You also have to have a personal agent of service, especially when they're out-of-state LLCs and like Wyoming LLCs. These personal agents of services, their only job is to serve you. So, hey, congratulations, you just got served. Then you got to show up in a court and defend yourself. So, the simple reality is that once a lawsuit's filed, the legal discovery process, it begins. And what's even worse is that if you want secrecy to even work, which is also considered, lying under oath, that's just a one-way ticket to jail. And an example of this is that, the creditor suing you, they have the legal right to demand information about the assets you own. And the courts enforce this very broadly, state by state, especially when you're not in the South. So at this point, the only way to keep an asset anonymous or a secret is to lie about them and commit perjury. And that's not good. People go to jail for committing perjury. And so we don't advocate for hiding. We just prefer to have a full disclosure of all the assets that you have in your asset protection plan and just set it up properly, especially with like a hybrid trust so that you're now in the strongest jurisdiction to fight and negotiate from strength. That's really where the magic of asset protection comes into play, is how a limited partnership and a trust play off of each other when it comes into lawsuits.
Wow. Okay. You gave us so many golden nuggets there. That was incredible. I really do appreciate that. I want to back up just a little bit. You mentioned hybrid trust multiple times. Could you talk a little bit about that and what it is?
Yeah. So a hybrid trust is combining the strength of an offshore Cook Islands trust and a domestic trust. And now to understand what its magic is and why you want to hybrid up two different types of trust is let's just break down like what trust even are. And I think there's a big misconception of a lot of people not even understanding, one, that trust exists, and two, that there's different types of trust. And you get a lot of people like, oh, well, I have a trust. I have an estate plan, so I'm good. No, you're not. Each trust is used for a different type of purposes. So I love trust, and having a trust at the very top of your planning is just very powerful. And then this is where creating an asset protection trust, and more importantly, picking the proper jurisdiction, comes into play. Just think of trust like Baskin Robbins, like the ice cream shop. Trust comes in lots of different flavors and types, just like ice cream. You have chocolate, you have vanilla, you have strawberry, Rocky Road, all different types of ice cream, but they're all ice cream. Now, the standard 101 trust that everybody's familiar with from the 60s is the family revocable living trust, like your estate plan. Your parents have one, grandparents probably have one, one of your aunts and uncles do. Trusts don't die. So when you do, and you actually funded the trust by transferring ownership and title to it, you don't have to go through the courts and probate. And it changed the landscape of estate planning. Then you also have land trusts for real estate that hold your land, and you connect them to an LLC. But we got to remember, land trusts do not have any protection in and of themselves. They're only as strong as the LLC that they're connected to. And they're just a privacy mechanism. They're not a protection mechanism. Then from there, you have higher levels of trust. And these are called asset protection trust. And this is where I think we can spend a little bit of time breaking down the three different types. And I think you and your listeners will probably understand 99% more of most attorneys out there on asset protection trust.
Let's do it.
Awesome. So these asset protection trusts really came to play in the early 1980s. And an asset protection trust is what's called a self-settled spendthrift trust. So all self-settled means is that it's created for you. So they're for you, by you, as your own beneficiary. And they have very important spendthrift provisions in them. This lets you protect your assets while you're actually living from creditors and not having to relinquish control of your assets. The difference is that they allow you to protect the assets not just for your grandkids, but for yourself, which wasn't allowed, which we weren't allowed to do in the past. And again, you're probably somewhat familiar with another type of self-settled trust that I mentioned called the revocable living trust. Again, a lot of you have them, or some your parents have them, hopefully, grandparents. They're the same, like they're self-settled, created for you, by you. The difference is that with an asset protection version of this trust, it includes these critical provisions called spendthrift provisions. And what spendthrift provisions are is that they are these provisions that allow you to protect your assets from creditors, the people suing you, right? So they're the actual teeth behind it. And for those to work, they have to be not revocable, but irrevocable. So it's a very different type of trust, just like chocolate and vanilla, right? Both ice cream, different types of ice cream. And then this is where the fun actually really starts to happen, because we got two major school of thoughts, and then it really turns into a third. We can set these up internationally offshore in the famous Cook Islands, or we can create them domestically here in the US, or now we can hybrid and create them together. So again, we have these three options: offshore, onshore, hybrid. And for the historical context of this, so we understand the strengths and weaknesses of everything, right? In 1984, the offshore trust came first. This is the famous Cook Islands Trust, that famous asset protection trust. I like and choose the Cook Islands if and when it's applicable, because it's just the strongest home court advantage. They're the best. And why they're the best is because they have this fancy word called statutory non-recognition, meaning they don't recognize any other jurisdictional court orders in the world, including the United States. What this means is that, if you have a judgment against you in the United States and they, took it down to the Cook Islands to execute it, that judgment is worthless. They literally have no value whatsoever. Statutorily, the Cook Islands are prohibited from recognizing it, and they have a lot of statutory hurdles. Like they'd have to sue you down there, front the entire court costs, flying a judge from New Zealand, prove a case beyond a reasonable doubt, so the murder standard. You can't take your contingency fee attorney down there. They're unethical. And worse, if you lose, you pay. It's one of the single worst things that we don't have here in the United States, that you can be sued for a completely frivolous lawsuit, spend $200,000 on it. Then a judge will finally be like, yeah, this is a bunch of BS, this lawsuit. I'm throwing it out here. But you still just throw out $200,000, because our legal system in the United States, we don't discourage lawsuits. Our legal system is run by trial lawyers who don't want to stop lawsuits from happening. And then there's only a 1-year statute of limitations. So while you literally have now the most effective trust in the world by far, what's some weaknesses of it? Well, compliance, it falls short on that. Okay, like you did for those to maintain, you have a lot of IRS disclosures mandatory to do, 1035s, 1035As, FACTA disclosures. Like these are and cost, they're expensive. Generally $50,000 to set up, $10,000 to $12,000 a year to maintain, disclosing all your assets. So it's just overkill for most people. So then what you see is people running like, okay, I don't want to create, the offshore. I wish I had that strength, but the US has a version of asset protection trust. Let's just go here. So the domestic trust came about 10 years later. Alaska started it. Then, not to be outdone, you had like Wyoming, Delaware, Nevada follow suit. And then about 19 states now have some form of asset protection statutes. So the states started jumping on board, seeing like, hey, our legal system's a mess and a threat. And so we need to start doing things to protect your assets. And so asset protection in the United States is very valid. It's just a matter of how we go about it in the US. The issue with the purely domestic US-based asset protection trust is that we live in the United States of America. We have a constitution. We have Article 4, Section 1, the full faith and credit clause. This, is the full faith and credit here of every, judicial proceedings of every other state. So what this means is that, for example, Nevada can pass an asset protection statute, which they did. All right. But it cannot ignore a California or Washington or Florida court order. So where the Cook Islands can just literally throw that judgment in the trash, Nevada cannot. Nevada has to respect it constitutionally, and they even have to litigate it. And then you have courts just simply ignoring the choice of law clause, a lot of case law coming down, like what is it? In Ray Hubbard, Bately versus Mortison, Kilker versus Steelman, Dale versus Dale, just coming down and piercing through the choice of law clause, breaching into the asset protection trust, and breach means loss and loss of assets. So that is just unacceptable. So while they're cheaper to set up and you don't have any of the IRS disclosures, they unfortunately are not very effective. So then you're probably sitting here like, okay, well, Brian, like I want that strength, but it's just insane with the IRS disclosures and costs. The domestic's cheaper, but I actually want something to work. What do we do? Right? So that's where the hybrid came into play. About 30 years ago, my partner Douglas, he combined the strength of the offshore Cook Island trust. So what you do is you literally take a purely foreign Cook Island trust, and then you have that trust domesticated, so classified through the IRS as a domestic trust. And that is done through USC section 7701 of the tax code. So it's like having two passports. You can have your Swiss passport and your US passport. And as long as you have your US passport, the US will always consider you as US residents. So because of this bridge through the IRS, as long as we have our compliance in place, we stay classified domestically. And what this means is that the trust is cheaper to set up. It's more flexible. You have none of the annoying IRS compliance and really no IRS tax filings and disclosures at all, because the trust is now actually classified as a domestic U.S. grantor's trust through the IRS. But you now get to keep all that power and strength of the offshore trust if and when you ever need it. It's now in our toolbox in our back pocket. And so if a doomsday lawsuit ever did come your way, we break the bridge. We no longer are in IRS compliance, and we are what we are, a purely foreign trust with all that strength. So we're marrying the two concepts together and just taking out the best of both, kind of like a hybrid car.
Wow, I definitely need to go back and just re-listen to everything you said. It was just a huge legal lesson, and I do really appreciate that. I don't have a legal background whatsoever, so this is definitely a lot for me to dive into. So thank you so much for that, Brian. So a question that came up actually is kind of bring it back a little bit more basic, is the difference between legal planning versus tax planning. I know that attorneys and CPAs, they specialize in their own area, but there needs to be some overlap. What's the best way for, I guess, investors to go ahead and make sure they get the right asset protection as well as the correct tax benefits?
So one, your CPA shouldn't be giving you legal advice. A lot of them try to, and they shouldn't. So then you're asked like, okay, is that your legal advice? And I'm like, oh, no, like go talk to a lawyer. Then go talk to a lawyer. The problem that you get when you need to realize who you're talking to, like when you're going to get medical advice, right? You go see your general family doctor and they're like, oh, hey, we diagnose whatever, like white blood cells, you may have cancer. Go see a specific type of doctor. Hey, you're something going on with your brain. Go see a brain surgeon. Your heart, go see a heart doctor. You need to go to the right specialist. And attorneys that don't specialize in asset protection, they sound like a general doctor. Okay. A lot of them will dip their toes in asset protection, but their knowledge stops at LLCs. Nothing's wrong with that. It's just not where their specialty is, but they're trying not to lose low-bearing fruit. Like, oh, hey, I can create LLCs. I took a continuing legal education course, and now I can use these for anybody coming in. But they don't understand the hierarchy of how asset protection is structured and how it plays out in court, just like in the medical field. And then CPAs, they're not taught asset protection. They're taught tax mitigation strategies. That's their job. So there's nothing wrong with the CPA going and trying to set up systems for tax mitigation purposes. The problem is they're not understanding what happens in the litigation side and then how you can completely lock down and freeze assets once you get sued. And so an example of this, and I get this also a lot, is clients calling me where their CPA said, oh, hey, yeah, you're investing in real estate. Let's create an S Corp. And that is one of the worst things that you can do for real estate, especially from a litigation side. Because S Corps have shares. Shares can be frozen and seized by a judge. And then the issue also is, let's say over the years, you built up 5 million, 10 million, 20 million worth of real estate, appreciation all on this S Corp. And you call them and you're like, man, I overloaded this one LLC. I need to take some assets off the table and put them into other entities. God forbid I get sued to this S Corp. Now everything's on the hook. The problem is now once I move assets out, you owe the IRS back all that deferred taxation. No one has that kind of money sitting in their bank account. So unless you can pay the piper now, those assets have to stay stuck in that LLC. And so you're frozen and there's nothing I can do for you on that. So you never own assets through S Corps. You can run your business through an S Corp and have cash flow go into that and do all of your tax mitigation purposes, but then own the assets in a traditional LLC, lease the assets back to the S Corp, and at least protect the assets separate. Then you're not locked down. Then we can do our job. So it's really making sure the CPA is not giving you legal advice. They could be giving you tax mitigation advice, but at the same time, you need to talk to knowledgeable lawyers so that we can then marry everything properly together and at least explain the legalese to the CPA.
Okay, so it's important to have both. Are there people that specialize in both and they're kind of the go-to person? What would you call them? Attorneys, CPAs?
No, I mean, CPAs shouldn't be our attorneys. And there's tax attorneys. That's kind of like what we are, like asset protection attorneys, who then we have like LLMs in tax law. And then we just focus on the asset protection side. Like I'm not going to be going in and arguing to the IRS for you because I'm not practicing in the realm of tax law. But we have to marry all of this together with the taxes, how you're running your business, where money's coming in, how to protect the assets, and how to create the whole system together. And then we still have to be able to talk and explain things to your CPA, or realize like this CPA needs to be replaced.
Wow. Okay. That was really, really exciting and very educational. So I really do appreciate that, Brian. Do you have a piece of advice for our audience related to asset protection?
Yeah, I would say one, realize asset protection is not protection from not paying taxes. There's tax mitigation stuff that you can do, but you're going to have to owe what you owe. So we're not, don't expect to hide assets and not pay the government on it. Two, this stuff only works when you set it up beforehand. Just like insurance, you can't go plow somebody over with your car or have your house burned down and then call up the insurance and say, hey, I need insurance. My house just burned down. It's not going to get covered. Asset protection will not work if you set this up after the fact. So be proactive, set your planning up. You don't need to reach for the Taj Mahal with a hybrid trust in the beginning. You set it up where you're at, but realize you're going to scale, you're going to grow. So how do we set this up also to grow as you grow?
Got it. So you're saying people who have less than 250,000 in net worth probably don't need anything, but after
I wouldn't say you don't need anything. Get an LLC and insurance, maybe an umbrella policy on top of it. Then the rest of the pieces come into play as you grow.
Okay. So LLC, insurance, umbrella policy. Okay. That makes sense. And Brian, do you have a favorite book that you recommend about this topic to the audience?
No, there's honestly not very many good books written on asset protection, to be honest. You got to try. I can't even find them. And so, my partner, I keep talking like, should we write like a legal guide on this? I'm like, we don't have the time. We write a lot of blog articles. I would just say increase your financial IQ. Just keep reading investment books and finance books. One of my favorite, I like the Robert Kiyosaki series, all of them. They're all really, really good, and they break not a lot of this stuff down, but it gets your brain thinking in this realm, as well as taxes and how to protect your stuff. So it's a good combination of all the concepts as an overkey of it. So I would recommend just pick up any of those books.
Perfect. And just got a few more questions for you. Who would be your ideal client? Where should they be in their net worth or investment journey to possibly work with you?
Yeah, it's a good question. So my client profile generally is like high risk professional, like a doctor, and generally around like 1 million net worth mark. We have some stuff where I do like half plans where we start with the second layer, the management company and LLCs. They'd probably be just starting their investment journey around like 4 properties. So, 600,000, 700 exposed net. So that's like the equity of your home plus your equity in your rental properties and your exposed stock portfolio. So that's kind of where our client profile falls.
Perfect. And lastly, where can our audience get in touch with you? This has been phenomenal. I learned so much, so I really do appreciate your time, Brian.
Yeah, they can jump on my website, www.btblegal.com. I have it set up as an educational site, like lots of case law, lots of educational videos and resources. I'd rather you just be educated, right? So then you can get some knowledge to where you can ask appropriate questions to whoever it is you're going and talking to and know if they're floating you a line of BS or not and say like, what about this case? What about this case? If they don't have answers for you, then they're not that great. Move on. Or they just email me, Brian, Brian at btblegal.com. I generally do a 30-minute free consultation, and I'll give you like a nice, here's your risk profile, here's my thoughts, whether you're the right client for me or not, we'll figure that out.
Perfect. I'll link all that in the show notes. Brian, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me on.
Hey, it's BJ. If you liked this video, you're going to love this video. Make sure you click it, leave questions in the comments, and I'm here to help however I can. Hope you have a great day.